Jarek did not know why his hand kept trembling when he held his old rusted billhook on the porch. The earth beneath his boots was not just vibrating, it was singing. A low, rhythmic thrumming started in the deep bedrock of the valley and traveled up through the timber of his cabin, rattling the tin cups in the shelf. It was the sound of iron-plated hooves, and by the weight of the rumble, there were hundreds of them. The refuge, natural and smooth. The valley was a desolate, quiet place where the northern pine forests began to thicken, and the steep rocky foothills rose toward orc territory. Jarek was 34, a weathered human farmer who had spent his youth as a border scout, only to retire to this quiet homestead after his wife passed. He had spent 3 years raising his 6-year-old son, Leo, in the heavy silence of the basin. The traveler had arrived 3 weeks ago, collapsed in the rocky ditch near his sheep pen. She stood 6'5", a towering presence of dense gray-green muscle and quiet dignity. Her face was marked by the long, pale scars of old blade cuts, and her short pearlescent tusks caught the dim light of his kitchen. She had been bleeding from 3 rusted crossbow bolts in her shoulder and thigh. Jarek had not asked for her clan or her history. He had simply cut the iron from her flesh, stitched the deep wounds with boiled hemp thread, and let her sleep in the barn. Since then, she had stayed, helping with the heavy chores in absolute silence. Seamless, steeturchin, natural and smooth. The unconventional helper. Natural transitioning to warm and emotional. The daily rhythm of the farm had become an unspoken partnership. While Jarek attended to the sheep, Kala worked in the background. She wore an oversized wool tunic that had belonged to his late wife, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded like bridge cables. She did not complain, and she did not ask for wages. She simply chopped firewood with a single, effortless hand strike, hauled 300-pound logs as if they were dry branches, and watched over Leo. Leo had accepted her without a single trace of fear. On the 4th night, he had handed her his one-eared wooden dragon, asking her to protect it. From the frost, Kala had held the tiny toy in her massive palm for an hour, her amber eyes soft in the firelight, before placing it carefully on the highest shelf where the draft couldn't reach. The dust cloud at the edge of the valley was thick, red, and choking. Through the trees rode the vanguard. They were mounted on massive, black-furred war boars, their tusks armored in jagged brass bands. The riders were orcs of the Blood Spire clan, wearing spiked plate armor that had never been polished. Within minutes, the cabin was surrounded by 500 heavy cavalrymen. Thyrlances formed a cage of steel around Jarek's home. Jarek stood on the porch, his body shielding the door. Inside, Leo was locked in the root cellar, holding his breath. Jarek raised his old billhook, his knuckles white against the ashwood handle. The commander of the vanguard, a massive, scare-faced warlord named Korak, guided his beast forward. He looked at Jarek's patched coat, his rusted tool, and his average height, and let out a guttural, mocking snort. "Human," Korak boomed, his voice shaking the loose needles from the pines. "You are harboring the fugitive of the High Queen. Turn her over, or we will plow this dirt with your bones." Jarek did not flinch. "There are no fugitives here, only a traveler who has earned her keep." "She is a deserter," Korak spat, raising his lance. "She belongs to the Queen's executioner." The heavy oak door of the barn creaked. Kala stepped into the sunlight. She was holding a wooden bucket of feed in her left hand, and her hands were covered in white flour from the bread she had been helping to knead. She walked with a slight limp from the crossbow wound, but her posture was that of a tower that refused to lean. She stopped next to Jarek's porch, looking at the 500 armored riders with an unblinking amber gaze. "Korak," she said. Her voice was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to maketh warboars drop their ears in submission. "You are standing on the winter eye." The vanguard commander froze. The sneer died on his scarred face, his mouth opening in absolute disbelief. He looked at the giant orc woman in the flour-dusted wool apron. He looked at the wooden bucket in her hand. Slowly, the heavy iron plates of his armor clattered as Korak slid off his warboar and dropped to both knees in the mud of Therd. Behind him, 500 heavy cavalrymen dismounted in unison. The sound of 500 armored bodies hitting the wet earth was a heavy crack that echoed off the hills. "General," Chronicles whispered, his head bowed so low, his helmet touched the frozen grass. We did not know. The Queen's court said you had been slaughtered at the northern pass. General Kala Iron Eye, who had commanded the high legions and broken the southern walls, set the feed bucket down on the steps. The Queen wanted a war of extermination, Kala said, her voice quiet but carrying to the very edge of the valley. I did not, so I left her army in the snow. She looked at Jarek, who was still holding his billhook, his mind trying to reconcile the woman who had spent yesterday peeling potatoes with the legendary general, currently holding the fate of the province in her hands. This human saved me, Kala said, placing her warm, green palm over Jarek's hand on the billhook, gently lowering the weapon. He did not ask for my name, my rank, or my banner. He only gave me a warm hearth and a dry bed. Chronicles looked up, his jaw working. The Queen will not stop looking for you, General. If she learns you are here, then tell her, Kala said, her eyes turning cold and sharp as obsidian blades. Tell her that if she wants her general back, she will have to come to this valley herself. But tell her to bring her own shovel, because the dirt here is charred, and she will need to dig her own grave. Chronicles swallowed, nodded once, and scrambled back onto his beast. The horde turned. Within minutes, the 500 riders were moving back through the trees, their heavy thrumming fading into the distance, leaving the valley in its familiar, quiet stillness. Kala turned to Jarek, her amber eyes holding his. The rye will need to be replanted, she said, her voice returning to its soft, practical rumble. Jarek let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 3 weeks. He looked at this small house, then at his billhook, and then at her. I'll help you with the rye, Jarek said, a quiet smile finally breaking on his weathered face. After we eat. She extended her hand, her green palm, warm and rough, closed around his weathered fingers. They walked inside together, the latch clicking shut behind them, and the valley was quiet again. And that was enough.